It began with a dare, the kind of careless, impulsive moment that's meant to be forgotten by the next sunrise. But I still remember every detail, the hum of laughter in the room, the faint smell of perfume hanging in the air, the teasing glint in her eyes when she said, "If you're so confident, prove it. Be me for a day." At first, I thought it was a joke. I laughed it off, shrugged, even played along, pretending to pout like her while everyone cheered. But she didn't smile. She stood up, walked to her closet, and pulled out an outfit, a soft lavender dress, sleek and simple, yet so undeniably hers. "Put it on," she said quietly, almost too calmly. The room fell silent. My pulse started to race. I looked around, expecting someone to break the tension, to laugh and say it was all a prank. But no one did. Their eyes were fixed on me, waiting, daring. I could have said no. I should have. But something in her voice, in her gaze, made me hesitate. Maybe it was pride. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need to prove that nothing could shake me. So I nodded. The laughter returned, soft and uncertain, as I took the dress from her hands. The fabric felt impossibly smooth, light and warm against my skin. I didn't know why I was trembling. I told myself it was just nerves, embarrassment, that's all. But there was something else beneath it, something unnamed, humming quietly through my veins. She led me to her room, closing the door behind us. I half expected her to smirk or mock me, but she didn't. Instead, she moved with calm precision, pulling open drawers, laying things out, foundation, blush, lipstick. The colors looked foreign to me, the tools unfamiliar, yet her hands moved with practiced ease. "Sit," she said softly. I did. For a while, neither of us spoke. She worked methodically, brushing, blending, shaping. Her fingertips grazed my jawline, my cheeks, my eyelids. My heartbeat seemed to echo in the quiet. The mirror before me reflected a half-formed image, not her, not me, but something in between. When she finally stepped back, she tilted her head slightly. "Look," she whispered. I did. And for a second, I couldn't breathe. The person staring back at me wasn't someone I recognized, not fully. But the eyes were mine. They just looked softer, clearer, more alive. My throat tightened as the realization sank in. I should have felt ridiculous, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something else, an odd mixture of confusion and calm, like the world had shifted slightly and I was standing somewhere new. She smiled, faint but genuine. "Now," she said, handing me a pair of heels, "walk like me." That's when the laughter started again, not from her, but from behind the door. I realized the others were still there, waiting, listening. My face burned, but she placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ignore them," she said. "Just try." So I did. I stood, wobbly at first, the heels foreign and strange beneath me. But as I took my first hesitant steps, she watched closely, not mocking, not laughing, but studying. Something flickered across her expression, recognition, maybe, or disbelief. And then she said the words that would stay with me for the rest of my life. "You could actually be her." My breath caught. I didn't understand what she meant, not then. I just laughed awkwardly and looked away, trying to hide how those words made my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. But deep down, somewhere quiet and unguarded, a part of me knew she was right. And that was the moment everything began to change. The next morning, I thought it would all feel like a joke that had gone too far. But the memory wouldn't fade. Every time I blinked, I could still see that reflection, the unfamiliar softness around my eyes, the strange calm in my chest. At school, everything looked the same, yet slightly altered, as if the colors had been turned up just a little. I caught myself glancing at people's movements, their clothes, the way confidence seemed to live in posture. I had never paid attention like that before. That afternoon, she found me again, the one who had dared me. She walked up quietly and said, "You left the lipstick on my desk." Her tone was neutral, but there was a spark of something in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe. "I figured you'd want it back," I said, trying to sound casual. "Keep it," she replied. It suited you. Those 3 words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I laughed it off, but I could feel the warmth rise in my cheeks. When she walked away, I slipped the lipstick into my pocket like it was something fragile, something secret. That night, I couldn't resist. Alone in my room, I took it out, turned it in the light, and remembered how she had looked at me through the mirror. I hesitated, then touched a small line of color to my lip. The sensation was electric, not vanity, not play, but recognition. I stared at the mirror again. The effect was minimal, barely visible, but the feeling that washed over me was overwhelming. It wasn't the lipstick itself. It was what it represented, a glimpse of a version of myself that had always been there, waiting behind the noise of everything I thought I had to be. Days passed and I told no one, yet the secret lived close to my heart. I noticed changes that weren't visible to anyone else. The way I carried myself, the small gentleness in my gestures, the quiet satisfaction in my own reflection. Then one afternoon she caught me off guard. "You haven't been the same since that night," she said. Her tone wasn't accusing, just observant. "Maybe I've just been thinking," I answered. "About who you really are?" she asked, tilting her head. I froze. I wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I nodded. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that holds no judgment. "Sometimes it takes pretending to see what's already true," she said. Her words echoed in my mind long after she left. Pretending to see what's already true. I repeated it to myself until it no longer sounded like a question, but a quiet revelation. That night, I opened my closet and stared at the plain, neutral clothes hanging in neat rows. For the first time, they felt like costumes, not the kind I wanted to wear, but the kind that hid things. I realized that what had begun as a dare had opened a door I could never quite close again. And though the thought scared me, it also filled me with a strange, unstoppable kind of peace. The next few weeks moved like a quiet storm inside me. Nothing looked different on the outside, yet everything felt different. It started with small decisions that I couldn't explain to anyone. I began waking up earlier, standing in front of the mirror longer, as though I were waiting for someone to appear. My hands trembled every time I brushed my hair differently or noticed how certain expressions softened my face. I started spending more time around her, the girl who had started all of this. Her name was Maya. She was confident but not arrogant, kind without being too careful. I found myself drawn to that balance. One afternoon, we sat together in the library, books scattered between us. She glanced at me and smiled faintly. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Just thinking." "About the dare?" I hesitated, then nodded. It didn't feel like a dare anymore. She tilted her head. "What did it feel like?" I took a breath, unsure of how to say it without sounding strange. "Like I saw a part of myself that's been hiding for a long time." Maya didn't laugh. She just looked at me for a moment, long enough that I had to look away. Then she said, "Maybe it's time you stopped hiding." Those words sat with me all night. When I finally turned off the light, I could still hear them. Stop hiding. The next morning, I did something impulsive. I wore a softer shirt, one that clung lightly to my shoulders, and a pair of jeans that felt almost too fitted. It wasn't anything dramatic, no makeup, no accessories. But as I walked outside, I felt every passing glance like a heartbeat. At school, I kept my head down. Some people noticed, maybe. Some didn't. But Maya did. She gave me a knowing look when we crossed paths and whispered, "You look like you." It was such a simple sentence, yet it unraveled everything I thought I knew about myself. Over the next few days, she began teaching me small things: how to walk with more balance, how to let my voice flow softer, how to look at myself without fear. It wasn't about pretending anymore. It was about uncovering. But the real test came when my best friend, Liam, noticed the change. We were sitting outside after class when he asked, "You okay, man? You seem different." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him everything, but the words tangled inside me. "Just trying to figure things out." He nodded slowly, then shrugged. "We all do that, I guess." I smiled weakly, grateful for his simplicity, yet aware that my figuring out was not something most people would understand. That night, I looked in the mirror again, not to test or experiment, but to meet myself halfway. And for the first time, the reflection didn't scare me. It felt like home. The narrator's quiet self-discovery starts to ripple outward. Friends and family notice small differences: tone of voice, posture, confidence. At first there's confusion and some awkward questions, but also surprising moments of kindness. Maya becomes a steady presence, encouraging patience and honesty rather than secrecy. The narrator experiments carefully with appearance, finding comfort in expression rather than fear of judgment. Conversations at home grow more emotional but also more real. It's the first time they've ever spoken openly about identity and happiness. Through these experiences, the narrator learns that transformation isn't only about outward change. It's about trust, self-respect, and choosing peace over expectation. By the end of this stage, they begin to understand that living truthfully, even quietly, can be the most courageous act of all. The air that morning felt lighter, as if something inside me had quietly shifted into place overnight. I wasn't certain what that meant yet, but it showed in small ways. How my shoulders no longer tensed walking into school, how I caught myself humming on the way there, how the sunlight didn't feel like a spotlight anymore, but a warmth I could step into. Maya noticed before anyone else. "You seem different," she said, smiling. "Maybe I stopped fighting with myself," I told her. She laughed softly. That's usually when the real story begins. It did. I started taking small chances. I joined a literature club I'd always been too shy to attend, began writing short reflections about what it means to be seen, and even volunteered to read one aloud. My voice still trembled, but people listened. For once, they weren't laughing. They were connecting. Liam came to one of those meetings. I hadn't told him I was reading, yet there he was, sitting near the back, his expression uncertain but open. Afterwards he walked up and said, "That was honest. I didn't know you had that in you." "I didn't either," I admitted. He nodded. "Whatever you're figuring out, I hope it makes you happy." That was all. But it meant more than he could know. At home, the change was harder. My parents didn't understand why my voice and style were softer, why I spent more time writing or talking to Maya instead of hanging out with the same group of friends. My mother asked one night, "Is everything all right? You don't seem like yourself lately." The question hurt because, for the first time, I did feel like myself. "I think I'm just learning who that is," I said quietly. She looked confused, then thoughtful. "Then keep learning," she murmured and left it at that. There were still days of doubt, moments when I'd catch my reflection and wonder if I was brave enough to keep walking this path. But then I'd remember how it felt that first time I looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. I'd remember Maya's words, "Stop hiding." One weekend, she invited me to a small art festival downtown. The crowd was full of people expressing themselves in every color and form imaginable. No one stared, no one whispered. Everyone simply was. Standing among them, I felt something click deep inside, a quiet realization that there was space for me in the world, even if it didn't look like I once imagined. That night, after I got home, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. I am not becoming someone else. I am becoming real. And when I set the pen down, I realized that was enough. The transformation wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about letting truth breathe after years of silence. I didn't realize how much courage grows in silence until I began to speak. It started small, a few words written online, a story shared in a quiet corner of the internet where strangers understood what I couldn't yet say out loud. At first, it was terrifying. I expected judgment, the same kind that had once kept me afraid of mirrors. But what I found was something softer. Understanding, shared uncertainty, and messages from people who said things like, "I thought I was the only one who felt that way." For the first time, I wasn't alone. Maya encouraged me to join a community group that met every Friday evening. They called it The Circle, a space for people figuring out who they were, with no rules except honesty. I almost didn't go. I spent 10 minutes outside the door convincing myself I could. When I finally walked in, I saw faces that looked as nervous as mine, yet somehow at peace. People spoke about their stories, their fears, their small victories. No one asked for explanations. They just listened. When it was my turn, I stumbled over my words at first. I said I was learning to understand myself, not as who others wanted me to be, but as someone I was just beginning to meet. The room was quiet for a moment, then someone said softly, "That's the hardest part, and you're already doing it." I left that night with a feeling I couldn't name, not happiness exactly, but something close to freedom. Over time, the circle became my anchor. Each story reminded me that transformation wasn't about one grand moment. It was a series of tiny choices to keep showing up, to keep believing that I deserved to exist fully. Even Liam noticed the difference. "You seem lighter," he said one afternoon while we walked home. "Maybe I stopped pretending," I told him. He smiled, kicking a small rock down the road. "Then keep not pretending." That evening, I wrote those words on a sticky note and placed it on my mirror. Keep not pretending. Every morning after that, when I looked at my reflection, I saw not just change, but growth. The quiet kind, the kind that takes root in the heart long before anyone else can see it. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was walking towards something that was truly mine. What I didn't expect was how quietly self-acceptance spreads. It doesn't happen through speeches or perfect words. It happens through the way you start to breathe easier around other people. At school, that shift showed itself in small ways. I began raising my hand again in class, volunteering for group projects, smiling instead of looking away when someone caught my eye. The world hadn't suddenly become kinder. It was that I had finally stopped shrinking from it. One afternoon, a classmate, Aria, stopped me in the hallway. "I read what you posted online," she said. "The one about learning to feel real." My stomach tightened. "You did?" "Yeah," she said, smiling. "It helped me. I've been scared to talk about who I am, and your words made it feel possible."
I didn't know what to say at first.
I'd written that post late one night, thinking no one would ever read it. Yet here she was, proof that honesty can travel further than fear. That evening, I told Maya about it. She nodded with a quiet pride. "You're doing what you once needed someone to do for you," she said. "You're becoming that voice." Those words stayed with me. They turned nervousness into responsibility, the gentle kind that comes with realizing your story might help someone else stand a little taller. I began attending the circle not just to listen but to support others. New faces would appear, uncertain and cautious, and I'd recognize the same trembling hesitation I used to carry. I found myself saying things I once needed to hear. That confusion doesn't mean failure, that growth doesn't follow a straight line, that it's okay to take your time. Slowly, life stopped being about hiding from who I was and started being about living as who I'd become. Teachers noticed confidence in my work, friends described me as easier to be around, and at home the silence that once filled dinner conversations turned into calm curiosity. My parents were still learning, but they were trying, and that mattered more than perfection. One night, I sat outside with Liam, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. "You ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said. "It still feels like I'm in the middle of it." He nodded. "Maybe that's the point. You don't finish becoming. You just keep growing." His words made me smile. I realized then that growth isn't a destination. It's a rhythm you learn to trust. As I walked home under the streetlights, I felt the quiet joy of belonging to the world, to my friends, and finally, to myself. There comes a point when silence starts to feel heavier than fear. For months, I had been learning to live honestly in small spaces, in conversations with Maya, in the circle of friends who understood, in the quiet safety of my room. But there was still the wider world, the one that didn't know the story behind my change in tone or confidence. One Friday evening, after another meeting at the circle, I walked home through the soft dusk with my phone glowing in my hand. A message from Aria had popped up earlier that day. "You should tell your story on the school's open mic night. People need to hear it." At first I laughed. Me? Speak into a microphone? But the thought kept following me like a low melody I couldn't shake. By the time I reached home, it had turned into something closer to resolve. The next week, I signed up. When the night arrived, I nearly backed out. The auditorium buzzed with a small chaos of laughter and music, and I felt my heart trying to climb out of my chest. I could hear the echo of my own footsteps as I walked up to the stage, notes trembling in my hand. The spotlight felt warm against my face. I looked out and saw Maya near the front, Liam a few rows back, my parents sitting stiff but present. I took a breath that felt like the first real one of my life. I used to think courage meant pretending everything was fine. I began. But I learned that sometimes courage is the moment you stop pretending. The words flowed easier than I expected. I talked about the feeling of not fitting into the expectations I'd been handed, about discovering gentleness instead of shame, and about how the smallest acts of kindness had kept me moving forward. I didn't use labels, just feelings, real, human ones. When I finished, there was silence, then applause that grew until it filled the room. I couldn't tell who started it, but I saw my mother's eyes glisten, and Maya smiling as if she'd known this would happen all along. Afterward, people came up to me quietly, one by one. A boy from my history class said, "That was brave." A teacher whispered, "Thank you for reminding us what honesty sounds like." Even strangers offered shy smiles, and in every one of them I saw a reflection of the same relief I'd once found in other stories. Walking home that night, I realized that sharing my truth hadn't changed the world, but it had changed my place in it. I didn't feel invisible anymore. At the circle the following week, they surprised me with a small candle. "For lighting the way," Maya said. I laughed, half embarrassed, but as I watched the flame flicker, I thought about how far I'd come, from that first hesitant look in the mirror to standing on a stage under a brighter light. I wasn't finished becoming. Maybe no one ever is. But for the first time, the path ahead didn't scare me. It simply waited, wide open, full of possibility. After the open mic night, something subtle but undeniable shifted. People began stopping me in hallways, on buses, outside the cafe near school, not with questions but with stories. Each one started differently. "I've been afraid to speak up," or "I didn't know anyone else felt like this." And somehow, I had become the person they trusted to listen. At first, it was overwhelming. I wasn't used to being seen as strong. But the more I listened, the more I realized that every conversation gave strength back. There was something circular about courage. The more you shared it, the more it multiplied. Maya was the first to call me out on it. "You've turned into the circle's compass," she said one evening. "You always point people back to themselves." I laughed, embarrassed. "I just tell them what I wish someone had told me." "Exactly," she said. "That's leadership, not luck." Soon I was asked to help organize the weekly meetings. I printed flyers, arranged chairs, learned how to open a room so people felt safe. The first time I stood at the front to welcome everyone, my hands trembled, but only for a second. When I saw their faces, the fear melted away. We began hosting open sessions for the community. Different people shared art, poetry, or simply spoke about resilience. Parents came, teachers, neighbors who'd once looked unsure of what we were doing. It wasn't activism in the loud sense. It was transformation through listening. One night, a quiet teenager named Sam stayed behind after everyone left. "I want to do what you do someday," he said. "What's that?" "Make people feel less alone." I smiled. "Then you already know how. Start small, listen, be kind, and tell your truth when it's ready." That conversation stayed with me for days. It reminded me of myself years earlier, nervous, uncertain, waiting for permission to begin. And now here I was, giving it freely. At home, the energy changed too. My parents began asking about the circle, curious instead of cautious. They came to one of the community nights and listened quietly in the back. On the way home, my mother said, "You look at peace up there." "I am," I answered. She nodded. "Then we're proud." The words hit deeper than any applause. Months passed, and I realized that every act of openness, every story shared, every hand extended, had built a bridge between who I once was and who I was still becoming. The line between them blurred until there was only one version left, the honest one. Sometimes, late at night, I'd walk through the city and see the reflections of lights in windows. They reminded me of that first time I looked in the mirror and felt something awaken. Only now, the reflection wasn't searching. It was steady. I didn't know where life would lead next. Maybe more speaking, maybe more writing, maybe something entirely new. But I knew one thing for certain. The strength I had found wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever dared to live truthfully, even when their voice shook. And that thought alone was enough to keep me moving forward. The sunlight spilling through the window caught me mid-step, glinting on the soft curves of my body that I was finally learning to call my own. I paused for a moment, letting the warmth sink into my skin, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel shame. I didn't even feel doubt. All those years of hiding, of pretending, of wishing, everything that had weighed on me so heavily felt like it had been washed away by this quiet, golden light. I ran my fingers over my dress, feeling the delicate fabric brush against my thighs, and a shiver ran through me. Not from cold, but from something far more thrilling. Every inch of me, every curve and line, had been sculpted into something I could finally recognize as me. My reflection in the mirror had always felt like a stranger, a tease of what I could be. But now, as I twirled slowly in front of it, I caught that familiar sparkle in my own eyes, the glimmer of someone free, someone unstoppable, someone ready. She watched me from the doorway, leaning casually with that knowing, soft smile that had always made me both nervous and excited. The person who had guided me through this transformation, who had forced me, yes, forced me, though always with care, to confront every hidden desire, every secret longing, now looked at me with pride. "You've changed," she said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. I laughed softly, the sound light and airy, carrying a weight I hadn't realized I'd been holding for so long. I admitted, my voice trembling slightly, but growing stronger with every word. I'm finally me." She stepped closer, and the air between us seemed to vibrate with unspoken understanding. "You've always been her," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "You just didn't know how to let her out. But now," her eyes sparkled, "now you don't have to look back." And I knew she was right. I would never look back, not at the shy boy I had been, not at the doubts that had paralyzed me, not at the mirrors that once reflected someone I couldn't embrace. That life had served its purpose. It had led me here, to this body, to this confidence, to this freedom. I stepped toward the door, feeling the soft click of my heels against the floor with each movement, and the world outside seemed to lean in, waiting for me. Every sound, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the faint laughter of children playing down the street, sounded brighter, more vibrant. It was as if the universe itself had taken notice, as if it had been waiting for me to step fully into my truth. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, afternoon air, and I felt an unexpected thrill surge through me. This was more than transformation, more than crossdressing, more than curiosity fulfilled. This was life reclaimed, every hesitation and fear replaced by exhilaration and wonder. I could feel my heart beating in sync with the possibilities stretching out before me, endless and intoxicating. I walked into the sunlight, letting the warmth kiss my skin, letting the gentle breeze tug playfully at my hair, and I laughed again. This was freedom. Pure, unshakable, unapologetic freedom. My reflection in mirrors would now be a constant reminder of who I had become, not someone forced into femininity, but someone who had grown into it, who had embraced it, who now carried it like armor and crown alike. And even as I stepped further into the world, ready to be seen, I knew that nothing would ever stop me from being her, from being me. Every glance, every step, every smile I would give, every new experience I would dive into, it was all mine to claim. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be truly unstoppable. Because I was no longer hiding. I was no longer pretending. I was no longer the boy who had once trembled at the idea of a dress or the thought of being seen. I was her, fully and gloriously, and I would never look back.